Yalamat everyone and welcome. On behalf of the Ismaili Tariqa and Religious Education Board for Canada and the Aga Khan Education Board for Canada, I would like to welcome you to the Horizon Conference webinar series. My name is Alia and I will be your moderator for today. Today is our fourth webinar of this series, and we are really excited to have Dr. Hussein Rashid joining us to discuss Imam Ali as a Muslim superhero. But before we begin, we just have a few administrative things to take care of. So just a quick note regarding the access line. If you require more information, support, or assistance during this time, please feel free to reach out and call the access line at the number seen on your screen. I would like to quickly acknowledge our Horizon Conference and webinar team. As mentioned, my name is Alia Ramtalat Rani, and along with Naz Virji Babo, we are your Horizon Conference team co-leads. Joining us today, we have our webinar technical coordinator, Aris Ramtala, and our support team comprising of Nadim Ramtala and Imran Kaku. So today we begin with a quote by His Highness Aga Khan at the state banquet in Tanzania on August 18th, 2007, and I quote, "As the 49th Imam of the Shia Imami Ismaili Muslims, I often look back at the words of the fourth Caliph, who was also the first Imam of the Shia Muslims, Hazrat Ali ibn Abi Talib. Listen to Hazrat Ali's words, quote, 'No honor is like knowledge, no belief is like modesty and patience, no attainment is like humility, no power is like forbearance, and no support is more reliable than consultation,' unquote. The passage beginning with the word knowledge and ending with the word consultation sums up my message to you tonight. It is my prayer that all of us, with a common commitment to knowledge and in a continuing spirit of consultation, can go forward together to meet our great challenges," unquote. The Horizon Conference webinar series was created to bring together scholars and other experts to share their knowledge and expertise. Those of you who have joined us in the past have gone on an adventure beginning in Antarctica. We then journeyed out into space and explored how planets are born. And last week, we explored the moral aspects of self-driving cars. We really hope this webinar series allows you to learn, to explore, and to inspire you to understand creation in all the forms. So let's begin. If we can go to the next slide, I would like to introduce Dr. Hussein Rashid. So I'm very excited to introduce our guest speaker. Dr. Rashid has a BA in Middle Eastern Studies from Columbia University, a Master's in Theological Studies focusing on Islam, and an MA and PhD in Near Eastern Languages and Cultures, focusing on South and Central Asia from Harvard University. His research focuses on Muslims and American popular culture. He recently finished co-editing a book on Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel. He is currently co-editing a volume on Islam and popular culture and another volume on Islam in North America. Without further ado, Hussein, I would like to welcome you and thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to be with us today.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Ramadan Mubarak, everyone. Alia, thank you for that wonderful introduction, and thanks for the Horizons Conference team for having me here today. I really want to thank all of the attendees for being here as well and taking time out of your days. Here in New York City, where I'm at right now, we've got an absolutely beautiful day. And so I really appreciate all of you taking time to be here. Today's talk is something that's really exciting for me to get into with you. It's called Truth, Justice, and the Spiritual Way, Imam Ali as a Muslim Superhero. And I'm going to point to you, if you're looking at the slide, just notice in the superhero there's a hyphen, and that hyphen is going to become really important for us today. But let me tell you a little bit about how I got onto this topic. It's based on a paper I wrote by the same title Truth, Justice, and the Spiritual Way, Imam Ali as Muslim Superhero, in a volume called Muslim Superheroes. And the premise, or the thing that got me interested in writing about this topic, was this phrase that we say daily, La fata illa Ali, la sayf illa Dhulfiqar. There is no hero besides Ali, and there is no sword besides Dhulfiqar. And the question I asked myself is, what does it mean to say that Imam Ali is a peerless hero, that there is no other hero besides Ali? What does heroism look like for us as Muslims? And one of the things that I want us to get into today is really trying to define what is a superhero. And then from there, turn into the stories and teachings of Imam Ali, looking at some modern representations, in particular, comic stories of Imam Ali from a group in India called Sufi Comics, and looking at two stories that sort of get into this question of heroism. And of course, we'll end with a Q&A. So first and foremost, the question that I want to ask you is, how do we define a superhero? What do we think of when we hear the word hero? And I don't know if there's a way to get some of that out there, but if you would just take 10 seconds, and that's all I'm going to give you, 10 seconds, tell me what a hero is to you. What do you think of when you hear a hero? And I see some people are saying superpowers, or saying masks and costumes. That's all true. But how many of you thought of Dory from the Finding Nemo movies as a hero? And I would argue that really Dory is one of the great heroes of the modern era in the English-speaking world. So let's think and let's look a little bit as to who or what a hero is. A hero, not a superhero, but a hero, is somebody who acts within human capabilities, that this person acts in a selfless manner, and this person acts in a way that serves other people. Now, a hero usually has all of these categories, has all of these elements, but could have 2 out of 3, or even if they have 1, they're really selfless, then we say that person is a hero. So some examples that might come to mind are teachers, or medical professionals, or firefighters, and especially in this time we're living in now, food service workers. So really thinking about a hero as somebody who is just like you and me, somebody who has normal human abilities and works within those abilities to be in service to other people. This hero is different than a superhero. And here, please notice that there's no hyphen. This hyphen seems like a small thing, but it really is going to become really important to us. So a superhero is somebody who acts beyond human capabilities, that this person has powers. Now, these powers could be superpowers like Superman's, or they could be powers of intelligence like Iron Man that are used in ways to augment human capabilities, or with Batman. And as a result of these powers, the superhero uses these superpowers for a greater good. And so some examples of these include Black Panther, the image of whom we see here, Wonder Woman, or from the X-Men series, Iceman. So again, these are people who have abilities beyond normal human abilities, and they decide to use those powers for a social good. How is that different from a superhero, the figure with a hyphen? And for me, this is the important part when we're trying to understand what heroism is from a Muslim perspective. So a superhero is first and foremost a hero. Their ability to help others is not dependent on having special abilities. They serve other people first and foremost. These superheroes fulfill ethical ideals of service to God and to people. And as a result of fulfilling those ethical ideals, the divine favors the hero with powers. These powers, and this is really important, these powers are contingent on correct behavior and belief. That means that if our hero does something that isn't morally correct or ethically correct, or gives up their belief in the divine, those powers disappear, those powers go away. And finally, the superhero, from a Muslim perspective, is a model for others to try and emulate. So that when we look at a superhero, we are trying to be like that person. We are trying to fulfill those ethical ideals. So let me just recap, because I know this can be confusing. There's a lot of information coming at us at the same time. What is the relationship between a superhero without the hyphen and the superhero with the hyphen? So the superhero may be good, but the super dash hero is good, definitionally is good. The superhero has powers in an absolute way. The super dash hero is pro-social, serves other people. The superhero, because of their power, takes on a pro-social mission, but the super dash hero gets their powers because they are serving other people. The superhero has an alter ego, Clark Kent and Superman, Bruce Wayne and Batman. The super dash hero has no alter ego. That heroism, the ability to do good, is integral to that super dash hero. You need to know who they are and why they're doing what they're doing. The superhero can't be emulated, because if Bruce Wayne as Batman could be emulated, Jeff Bezos of Amazon would be doing great things for the world right now. But for the super dash hero, that person becomes a figure of emulation. We're going to try to be like that person, because that person has a relationship to God that by fulfilling their pro-social mission, they get these powers, and we need to be able to we're not aiming for superpowers, but we're aiming to understand how being ethical and moral in the world serves a greater purpose. So let's get into this a little bit. Who are some, and again, no dash here, superheroes that are Muslim? There are lots of stories of superheroes that are Muslim. There's a series called The 99, which is created by somebody who splits their time between New York and Kuwait. And they have their 99 superheroes, each one manifests a different attribute of the divine. So the figure you see up front with the lantern is a character named Nura, who has the ability to control light. But this person is a superhero that is Muslim. By receiving these special powers to control light, she adopts a pro-social mission. There's a character called the Green Lantern, and one of the Green Lanterns is an Arab American Muslim named Simon Baz. And DC Comics, who publishes the Green Lantern series, released a Happy Ramadan message a couple of days ago. So this is that image that you're seeing. But again, he gets the powers of the Green Lantern and takes on a social mission. He is not necessarily living this broader social mission that gets him these powers. And then the character I'm personally, the superhero I'm very invested in at the moment is Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel, who takes on these abilities to metamorph, change her body shape, and lives her life as a Muslim, and then becomes a superhero, again, no dash. And you can see an image of the book that I co-edited that just came out. But who are Muslim superheroes? The ones that we as Muslims look to within our own tradition that fulfill our models of heroism, who live these ethical lives, these moral lives, and as a result are rewarded by the divine with some sort of powers. So first and foremost, the broad category are the spiritual masters, the awliya, the friends of God. In Indonesia, there's a group of these known as the Wali Sangho, the 9 Wali, who have these stories in Indonesia. We can think of Jalaluddin Rumi, who talks about the Kaaba coming and circling him because of his spiritual mastery, or Rabi al-Basri, who is able to walk on water and fly in the air because of her spiritual commitment and devotion in the way she lives her life. And broadly speaking, we can talk about the family of the Prophet Muhammad, Fatima, Hussein, Zainab. For us today, we really want to look at Imam Ali. And even though I'm going to be talking a lot about Imam Ali today, I'm doing it from a non-Shi'i perspective. And this is important because while a lot of what I'm saying doesn't differ from Shi'i communities and non-Shi'i communities, the idea of imamate layers a level of complexity, theological complexity, that makes the idea of emulating the imams much more difficult for us as Shia. So I'm really talking about Imam Ali as a broader universal hero, a universal Muslim hero, rather than a particularly Shi'i hero. In ways we could also, in the ways I'm going to talk about Imam Ali today, we could also talk about Bibi Zainab with less of the theological complications. But again, I'm really focusing on Imam Ali because this is the paper that I wrote. So let's get some technical background in for us right now. What are some of the things we need to know? So the word fatah, la fatah illa Ali, is related to this word fatua, and some of you may know the Persian word javan mardi. Fatua is the Arabic, javan mardi is the Persian, and literally this term means young manliness. And it's a broad gloss for the idea of heroism. So even though this literally has a gendered aspect to it, it's much broader. It is about chivalry, it is about heroism, it is about correct behavior, and in practice, it's not gendered. So even though the word has this gendered quality, this is open to both men and women. And core are questions of adab and akhlaq, correct behavior and ethics. And by living this ideal of fatua or javan mardi, you generate karamat or super actions, superior actions. This is different from another term some of you may be familiar with, which is mojiza, which means miracles. And miracles are really limited from a technical sense to the prophets. The Ahl Bayt have karamat. They have these super actions. So as we look, and now that I've introduced this term, as we look at Imam Ali, I want you to think about questions of fatah or fatua and karamat that come into play. So as we look at Imam Ali and think about some of his stories, what I want to do is first is go through the teachings of Imam Ali. Then look at some of the karamat that Imam Ali exhibits. What does it mean to have fatah in practice? And all of this will be intermixed with some modern examples. So first and foremost, starting with the teachings of Imam Ali is perhaps his most well-known teaching that's in public, that the United Nations has recognized as one of the great texts of world civilization, his letter to Malik al-Ashtar. Malik al-Ashtar is the man that Imam Ali appoints as his governor in Egypt. This letter is to be found in the collection of Imam Ali's sayings and wisdoms called Nahj al-Balagha. Some of you may know it from the book Justice and Remembrance, written by Reza Shah Ghazami. It's often used in our REC system as well. And so there are a few things I want to highlight from this letter. And if you haven't read this letter, I really urge you to take some time and read it. It is beautiful. It is deservedly a great piece of world literature and ethical guidance. But there's a lot in there. We can't cover all of it. So I just want to highlight a few things that I want to bring up for you for our purposes today. First, Imam Ali tells the governor, forgive because God is forgiving. Imam Ali says, do not act rashly. Look for multiple courses of action. He says, always focus on justice. And this to me is something that really resonates and has resonated to me for years and years. Imam Ali tells Malik al-Ashtar, who's the governor of Egypt, remember the common folk over the elite, especially those who have no access to you, that is to the governor, because these people are the basis of society. In other words, the very people who make society run are the people who have the least access to power. And so the best of rulers is the one who remembers who runs society, not the one who is beholden to power, to worldly power. Imam Ali tells the governor, set most of your time to think of God and to nurture your soul. And he says, appoint as head of the army someone who is slow to anger, quick to forgive, kind to the weak, severe with the strong, and is disinclined to violence. So think about this. The person who you want as the head of your army is somebody who doesn't want to engage in violence, because violence should not be a primary resort, should not be a first resort. Our first avenue should always be to forgive, to be kind to the weak, and to be strong, to meet strength with strength. So to me, this letter exemplifies so much of what it is, of this ethical worldview that the Imam is attempting to teach, and that we then see, as we'll see in the coming slides, that the Imam then does live throughout his life. And so again, not only we don't just have to guess what it is of the Imam's life that we are trying to emulate, but through his direct teachings, we know the things that we could emulate in our own lives. Because I don't think much of this is irrelevant for us today. We should be forgiving. We should not be rash. We should focus on justice. We should set time apart for God and to nurture our souls. And we should remember those whose society is very quick to forget. And so now I want to turn to a comic. This comic, again, is from Sufi Comics, a group of comic makers based in India. And so you'll see the top right-hand corner, it says, once in the markets of Kufa, Iraq. And the person we're seeing with his beard facing us is Malik al-Ashtar. So we come to the next panel. Somebody takes a clod of dirt or some food or something and throws it to Malik al-Ashtar. This is obviously before he becomes the governor of Egypt, and hits him on the back of the head. And Malik al-Ashtar looks around, doesn't see anybody who threw this thing at him, and continues walking. And we see this dialogue. Oh man, you've just insulted Malik al-Ashtar, the commander-in-chief of the Muslim army. So here Malik al-Ashtar now, we discover, is not the governor of Egypt, but he is the head of the army. And the man who threw this thing at Malik al-Ashtar says, the same Malik who makes his enemies tremble in fear? What have I done? I think I see him entering the mosque. So this man who's thrown this thing runs towards the mosque and says, and he sees Malik al-Ashtar praying. And the man says to Malik al-Ashtar, I am sorry for the sin I have committed. And Malik al-Ashtar responds, there is no sin upon you. By God, I came to the mosque especially to seek forgiveness for you. And so even before he's the governor, we see Malik al-Ashtar, who is embodying the teachings that Imam Ali, who I am sure has spoken to him about these things before appointing him as governor of Egypt. We don't see Malik al-Ashtar getting angry. We see him being forgiving. We see him praying to God, seeking that moment to pray to God. And we as readers of this text ask, why would this man who's throwing something, why would he throw it to Malik al-Ashtar? We see Malik al-Ashtar is dressed in a much more refined way than the person who's throwing something. So is this a question of a class conflict? Is this somebody who's been forgotten by society, who needs the attention from the people who are visually appear as part of the elite? And again, Malik al-Ashtar, if we take that as a premise, Malik al-Ashtar is saying, it is not my job to punish those who are angry at their position in life. It is to be the forgiving one, to be the one who isn't angry, to be the one who cultivates their soul. So we assume that this is something that he has learned being in the presence of Imam Ali. Next, I want to turn to this question or this idea of karamat, these super acts that are attached to Imam Ali. And I need to say this, and I'll say it a couple of times during the presentation, that even though we look at our heroes, our superheroes, as people to emulate, and no matter what we do in that emulation, we are not promised to achieve the level of receiving the ability to do these karamat, of receiving these divine powers. We cannot emulate it, it is an ideal, but we know who the people are who have lived this ethical and moral life in part because of the karamat. Not only because of that, we can find ethical and moral models of people who do not display the karamat. But with Imam Ali, he has this karamat, we know this, we see this. So Imam Ali is this non-Nietzschean Superman. So Nietzsche has this idea, this German philosopher, he has this idea that human beings can become Superman by denying God. And in fact, we as Muslims turn this around and say, no, the only way you can achieve your true potential as a human being is by devotion to God. By reliance on ourselves, we will never achieve our true capacity. It is by submitting ourselves to divine will and acting in a way that is ethically and morally approved through divine guidance that we achieve our true potential. Imam Ali, of course, and that's the image here, is born in the Kaaba. And there's the battle of Khaybar, where the Imam comes and tears the gate off the wall of Khaybar, and no other man on the battlefield can pick up the gates by himself. It takes multitudes of men to be able to pick up the gate that Imam Ali pulls off. And of course, there is the Nadi Ali, the special prayer that is called by the Prophet to bring Ali to the Prophet's aid in battle because of the prowess that Imam Ali brings, and that he is the manifestation, that is, Imam Ali is the manifestation of marvels. And so we see this karamat, and it is important to recognize that Imam Ali is in relationship to other members of the Ahl Bayt, including Bibi Fatima, Hazrat Hussein, Bibi Zainab, and so on. So that there is the idea that our idea of hero, our superhero, is not just on the individual, but is based in community and is based in context. And so, digging a little bit deeper, what does it mean to be a fata in practice, to be this hero in practice? First and foremost is this trust in God, that God will provide. And here, when I talk about relationship, this is what I mean. There's this beautiful story told of Bibi Fatima and Imam Ali, where Bibi Fatima wants a pomegranate, and Imam Ali says, I will get you a pomegranate. He goes out into the town, he goes out into the city, and he finds a pomegranate. It's the last pomegranate in the city. And as he's returning home, he sees somebody who is hungry, who wants food. And so Imam Ali gives this person, this hungry person, the last pomegranate in the city that he's promised his wife, Bibi Fatima. And he returns home and explains to Bibi Fatima what's happened. And Bibi Fatima says, well, that's the right thing to do. We have the ability to fulfill God's guidance to feed the hungry, and you fed the hungry. That's the right thing to do. And what we hear in that story is Imam Ali putting his trust in God, saying that there is this moral imperative to feed those who are hungry, to feed those who don't have food, and I will feed this person. Even though I've made this promise to my wife to get her this pomegranate, I have this higher promise, this higher commitment, where I need to feed this hungry person. And returns home and he tells Bibi Fatima, and Bibi Fatima says, yes, this is right. Our first commitment is to God. Our first commitment is to fulfill all these obligations God has put upon us. We need to feed the hungry. Categorically, absolutely. And what I think of when I hear this story is this idea that God provides for us, right? This idea of rizq, R-I-Z-K, this Arabic root, that God provides for us our sustenance, and that we have to have this faith that God will provide. And so if I stop the story there, that would be sufficient to say this is fata in practice, that this is what it means to live this idea of heroism, this ethical and moral ideal, and we see it in both Imam Ali and Bibi Fatima. But the story continues. The story continues that there's a knock at the door, and it is the angel Jibreel who is carrying with him a basket of pomegranates, who gives the pomegranates to Imam Ali and Bibi Fatima and says to them, God will provide. God is your source of sustenance. And it is not the world that provides, it is God that provides. And so God then sends the messenger angel of Jibreel and fulfills what it is Imam Ali and Bibi Fatima have put their trust in, that God is the source of sustenance for them. And God proves that. And this is an example of living that ethical and moral ideal is something that then reaps these super these super actions. There's another story of Imam Ali specifically called The Stranger. And here I'm putting up the comic from Sufi Comics again. And we see a man speaking to a woman hunched over, and he says, "It seems there is no one to carry your load. Allow me." The woman says, "Thank you, sir." And the woman says, who's hunched over, to this man who's standing upright now carrying the sack that the woman was carrying before. The woman says to the man, "My husband was a soldier. Caliph Ali sent him to the front lines where he was killed." And as they enter her house, she says, "Now I'm left alone with my children." And she starts to cry. And we see these two children. And they cry out, "Mom is back." Hearing the story of the widow and the orphans, this man couldn't sleep that night. The next morning, the man has returned to the woman's house and he says, "I brought some food for you. I can help around as well." The woman says, "Oh, thank you, kind sir." And we see now that the woman is standing straight, where she wasn't standing straight the day before. She was hunched over with the burden she was carrying. Even when she'd passed the load off to the man, she was still bent over. Today she stands straight, and the man who the day before was standing straight now has a slight bow to his back. The woman says, "You can take care of the kids while I cook." The man sits with the children and he says to the children, "Dear children, forgive Ali if he has failed his duty towards you." The woman says, "Sir, start the fire in the oven, please." The man sits hunched over the flame, saying, "Taste the heat of the fire. It is for those who fail in their duty to widows and orphans." Just then, the neighbor walks in and says, "Oh woman, it is the Caliph Ali working in your home." And the woman says, "Oh, I feel so ashamed. Please forgive me." And she's bent over again. And Imam Ali, the man who we now know to be Imam Ali, says, "No, forgive me, for I failed in my duty towards you." But now he's standing up straight. And this is a shorter version of a longer story. But the way in which it's represented carries a lot of the story for us. When we first see Imam Ali in the first panel at the top, he's standing straight. Even when he first carries the burden, the bag, he's standing straight. But when he hears the story of the woman, he becomes hunched over. Now he's carrying some sort of burden. And this burden, he says, is because I didn't take care of this widow and this orphan. This man went out to battle for me. He left behind a widow and an orphan. We are commanded in the Quran to take care of widows and orphans, and I did not make sure that this widow and these orphans were well tended. And so he comes in and he physically steps in to carry that. But they don't know who he is, so he carries this hidden burden of the ways in which he feels that he has let down this widow and this orphan and these orphans. Once it's revealed who he is, once his identity is known to the woman, he stands up straight and he can ask for forgiveness directly. So that as Caliph, and here again, I'm being very careful to say Caliph Ali, as is the story, not Imam Ali, Caliph Ali, he bears this burden of his obligation to the people that he has rulership over, and it is only when he is able to seek forgiveness directly and as himself that he's able to lift the burden from himself and fulfill his obligation to the community and to fulfill his moral and ethical commitments as a leader of the community. There's another story some of you may be familiar with about Imam Ali sheathing his sword, putting his sword away in battle. So this is one rendition in this comic, and I'll tell you another rendition some of you may be more familiar with. In this rendition, this comic, it says Imam Ali has cornered his opponent in battle. And his opponent says, "Have mercy, O Imam, I've heard you never refuse a beggar." The Imam says, "Yes, that is correct." And his opponent says, "Then I beg you to give your sword." That is Zulfiqar. And the Imam hands over the blade, hands over Zulfiqar. And his opponent holds up the blade and is getting ready to strike the Imam, and he says, "Who's going to protect you now?" And Imam Ali says, "My protection lies with the one in whose hand is my destiny." And his opponent says what confidence he has. And he says, "O Imam, I would like to be your follower." And the Imam responds to him, "Do not follow personalities, follow principles." Some of you may know the Rumi version of this story, where Imam Ali is about to strike down his opponent, and his opponent spits on Imam Ali, and Imam Ali puts the sword away. And his opponent says, "Why did you do that?" He says, "Before I was fighting you for the sake of God. When you spat upon me, I became angry, and I was fighting you for my sake. And that's not the way one conducts oneself. You don't get angry. You don't fight for the sake of violence." But again, the idea is that, as we saw in the letter to Malik al-Ashtar, we see this idea of controlling one's anger, of not seeking out violence, of looking for justice. And so the Imam says that his faith is in God. He doesn't reject beggars because, again, that's a commandment. He doesn't refuse beggars. And that he puts his complete and total trust and faith in God, in the divine. And so we see the Imam living the idea of fatah, of living this ethical and moral guidance, and his opponent not striking him down, but submitting to the Imam. And the Imam saying then, "But I don't need you to submit to me. I need you to submit. I need you to submit as a Muslim," right? The idea of submission of what Islam means. So we see then the Imam living this idea of fatwa, of heroism, of chivalry, and bringing other people into this idea and into this message. And so this is just a brief overview of some of the work that was in that article that I started the conversation with, and I just want to wrap up and tell you just some of the highlights we went through today, that we can talk about heroes, superheroes, and superheroes. And when it is really for us, for me as a Muslim, I think that it is for us as Muslims to look for our superheroes. We don't need superheroes. We are looking for ethical and moral guidance and models to emulate. These superheroes are grounded in faith and recognize the role of God in our lives. For us today, I looked at Imam Ali as an example of a superhero across Muslim societies. He, in these stories, offers guidance on achieving balance between din and dunya. He not only offers that guidance, but he lives that guidance. We have the ability to embody that guidance and to emulate him. He had divine favor and exhibited karamat, which we are not guaranteed. And his example is still taught in modern contexts as being relevant. So this, to me, is when we look at Imam Ali as a superhero, is what is important to me, what I wanted to share with you today. And I think this is an opportunity then for us to turn to questions and answers, or questions. I don't know if I've got answers, but I'll turn it over to our moderator again.
Thank you, Hussein, for such an interesting and fascinating presentation. So like Hussein mentioned, we will now take some questions. Again, if you do have any questions for Hussein, please use the question box in your control panel. So I guess the first question we'll start off with is, what do we say to our youth? How do we engage them to be more involved with sacrificing their time and knowledge based on Hazrat Ali's principles? And how can we get them involved without the need for recognition or reward?
So one of the things that really got me into this area of research was the idea of stories. I grew up with stories. My parents, my aunts, my uncles, everybody would tell me stories. You know, I had stories of the prophets. I had stories of the imams. And these were really important to me, right? And I think that this is something that I try to share with a lot of people is, what are the stories we're telling? If we can't tell a compelling story of Imam Ali, and there are compelling stories of these fictional characters on movie screens, and I love those movies, don't get me wrong, right? But if we don't have a compelling story to tell that's our own, and we don't recognize as our own, how is anybody else going to recognize? How is anybody else going to value what we value? One of the things that I've learned as a teacher, as an educator, is that my students respond not so much to facts and information just presented like that, but what is the web of meaning that it's a part of? What is the story that they will remember when we're done? And so for me, it's really about storytelling. And as much as I love my REC community, as much as I love the REC teachers that my children have, for me, the storytelling has to come from home, has to come from the family. And so how do we make sure that we have all these stories? How are we telling each other's stories, not just across generations, but across our peer groups? Because that's where so much learning happens. So for me, this is all about storytelling. And where do we find those stories?
Awesome. Our next question is about the term superhero. So you said that super-hero is from from the Muslim perspective, but whose Muslim's perspective? Is there one Muslim perspective? What is the superhero concept that you say has a Muslim perspective but based on, and where is it rooted from?
Thanks for the question. And I don't think I was clear enough at the beginning. Where I'm making this argument from is I'm trying, this is my opinion, this is the way I'm trying to structure an understanding of what heroism means from a Muslim perspective. There's certain ideas and certain tropes that we see over and over again in different hero stories. So if we look at tales of Abu Hamza, who is an uncle of the Prophet, if we look at stories of Imam Ali, if we look at, again, I come back to Bibi Zainab, there's certain tropes that keep appearing over and over again. And this is me trying to make sense and trying to put all of that together is what are the things that are in common. So this isn't definitionally like I couldn't point to one work that says this is a Muslim perspective on what a superhero is. This is me trying to work through a definition of what heroism means from a Muslim perspective, rather than relying on non-Muslim definitions of heroism or superheroism to define what a Muslim superhero is.
Perfect. Could you further explain what is fatwa?
Fatwa is, it's related to this root of fata, F-A-T-A. So when we say la fata illa Ali, there is no hero but Ali. Fatwa is heroism. It is, again, from the perspective that I'm using it here, is really looking at questions of correct behavior, of ethics, of morality, and how do you live those out, so that this is, more an ethical type of living.
Okay. I think this is another one that they're asking for further clarification. So when it comes to Karamat, does it still exist?
I love questions like this because I think it is so belief driven, right? How do you prove somebody has this extraordinary ability? And if you prove it, does that then diminish that person because by sort of a scientific, or it'll be on CNN tomorrow type proof? Does that then diminish it because so much of the ethical component is work that is done in private, that isn't necessarily made for public broadcast? So by public broadcasting it, do you take away that specialness? And so it really is a matter of belief. If you ask me personally, do I believe it still exists? Yes. If you ask me to point to anything, I couldn't do it. And so I think, do these powers exist in the world? Absolutely. If you ask me to prove it, I couldn't do it, and I couldn't point to any one thing without risk of upsetting my own sense of ethical thinking on this.
Awesome. What can you tell us about Hazrat Ali's view on the ultimate or divine reality? Are there any sort of resources that we can kind of turn to?
That's a whole other presentation. So I'll just settle on the resources. I think there have been some wonderful books that have come out in the last several years about Imam Ali. Two that come to mind are by Reza Shah Kazemi, both published by the IIS. One is Justice and Remembrance. The other is called Spiritual Quest. And Spiritual Quest deals a lot with the prayers of Imam Ali. And there is another book edited by M. Lakhani, and I'm forgetting the full title, but it's something like Sacred Justice and Imam Ali. But there's several other books that have come out that really do cover a wide range on the teachings of Imam Ali that are in English. And this feels like a really good time to get into that, I will also shamelessly plug my article upon which this talk is based, which has a I promise I can speak English, a bibliography of some of these works that you can look at as well.
Yeah, that would be great. Because I think a couple of people are definitely looking for some resources that they can refer to. What is the difference between miracle and heroism? How do we relate that to our faith as well as to other faiths?
So heroism for me is something that any of us can do, right? It is about recognizing that we have a role in society, and that we have obligations not just to ourselves, not just to our family, but to a broader sense of community, the Jamaat, the Ummah, the broader society in which we live. So I think of first and foremost, my first heroes are my family. They are the ones who taught me so much of what I know and who I am. And that doesn't really end at any particular point. My teachers, whether they were in school or RAC, were heroes to me. The volunteers I served with and the volunteers I serve with, the people who, when I go and volunteer in soup kitchens or do readathons, those people are heroes. So I think those are all, how do we live our life in an ethical and moral way? That's all ethical. That's all heroism to me. And then the question is one of intentionality. How am I doing it in a way that is reflective of my faith with foresight? Not just because it's a good thing to do, but because it's an intrinsic part of what I need to do, to use the Sufi expression, to polish the mirror of the heart. So how do I engage with that in a way that's intentional, that reflects my faith in God, my belief in Nabuwa, and the guidance of Imamat? So that to me is where we start then getting into this question of how do we emulate this super dash hero idea?
Hussein, could you mind just providing some additional references, not only to your article, but as well as to other comic titles that people can also refer back to?
Yeah, so Sufi Comics, which I spent a lot of time on in this talk, you can actually download a book, a digital book from there for free. It's suficomics.com. And it's run by two Twelver brothers, two Asnashri brothers. So there's a lot of talk of Nahjul Balagha and teachings of Imam Ali on their website in addition to the comics. If you're looking for comics more broadly, um, um, out of India, there's the Amar Chitrakatha series, and they have some Muslim heroes on there. In the US, I haven't seen much. In the US and Canada, I haven't seen much about didactic or teaching stories about Muslim heroes, but there are, again, Marvel Comics, DC Comics have heroes that are Muslim. Green Lantern, whom I mentioned, Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel. And if you're looking for other stories, I think the secondary curriculum, the STEP secondary curriculum, has just been doing a phenomenal job really collating these stories in really smart ways across themes. And I love reading some of those books. And I know from other webinars that other people are using them in those webinars as well. So highly recommend the STEP curriculum.
Awesome, that's some great resources. Okay, so we'll finally end with this last question. Who would you refer to now as a modern day Muslim superhero?
Such a great question. And I think it's related to, the reason I'm hesitating is I'm wondering if it gets to that question of karamat that we talked about before. But, if we just limit it to people who are living the ethics of their faith in really substantial and meaningful ways, obviously the Imam of the time, the Aga Khan, is the first name that comes to mind. Fatullah Gulen, who is a Sunni leader, a Turkish Sunni leader, is somebody who comes to mind. I think that there are people who I have had the pleasure to work with here in the States, in the US, who just live their faith in meaningful ways every day, trying to serve the Muslim community and the broader community, to make sure that we know that ethical living is fundamental to what it means to be Muslim in ways that are known and unknown, from doctors to tech people. So for me, it's just about looking around and seeing who has something that I want to be like, who's living their life in a way that I'd like to live my life, and not necessarily in the totality of the experience, but just in the ways in which they're being so intentional about living their faith out loud.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Hussein. We really appreciate you taking the time and being with us today, and I'm sure all of us really learned a lot. I know myself I did. So
Thank you
before we
all so much for
conclude,
having me.
thank you. So before we conclude, we just want to share some exciting webinars we have coming in the next few weeks. Next week, we have Dr. Shazan Mohammadi speaking about Gifts from Amin, the resettlement, integration, and identities of Ugandan Asian refugees in Canada. And following this, we have Dr. Renisa Mawani speaking about Across Oceans of Law. We really hope you will all join us for these webinars. Again, thank you for joining us today. So again, thank you to all our participants in the audience for taking the time to be with us. All your questions added much value to the discussion. We're sorry if we didn't get a chance to reach your question, but we do hope you all enjoy the webinar as much as we did. Finally, we ask the audience to take a few minutes to fill out a survey that will be emailed to you at the end of the webinar. If you have any questions that were not answered, please feel free to email us at the emails listed. We wish you all a safe and healthy weekend. Please don't forget, if you require more information, support, or assistance during this time, please feel free to reach out and call the Access line. Thank you and have a great evening.